Okay, so class, uh, here's the topic about the skeletal system. We were just recording this lesson because of the current weather conditions, and we are holding this lesson as asynchronous. So with that, let's begin the skeletal system. We're going to discuss the parts, divisions, classifications, and articulations. It's just an intro to our skeletal system topic. The skeletal system is an active living tissue. It has simple to complex functions. We have a total of 206 bones, and usually they are located left and right. Now we have, for example, the sternum, which is just one piece of bone, but most of the other bones have a left and right. Here we have the parts of the skeletal system. We have bones, joints, cartilages, and ligaments. We also have tendons. So we have ligaments and tendons. A ligament is a fibrous connective tissue that attaches bone to bone. And usually it serves to hold the structure together and keep them stable. A tendon, on the other hand, attaches muscle to bone, and it serves to move the bone upon muscle contraction. The overall functions of the bones are basically one, to support the body. It gives you the form and holds you upright. Okay? Protection of organs, the movement because of the contraction of the skeletal muscles, and we have also storage of minerals and fats, as well as blood cell formation. So the bones give you shape, gives you movement, makes blood cells, and provides protection for your organs. It also stores minerals. We have two basic types of bone tissue, the compact or spongy. So yung compact bone, yun yung matigas na part, the outer layer. The spongy bone is the inner layer that looks like a network of lighter or less dense structures, basically like a sponge. We have the classification of bones based on shape. Long bones, for example, we have the humerus or the arm bone. Short bones, we have the carpals of the wrist. Flat bone, an example is the parietal bone of the skull. Okay? And irregular bones, these are irregularly shaped for certain functions and movement. So again, the shapes of the bones: long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones. So let's look at the flat bones. No? We have flat bones, but are actually they're a bit curved, like the skull and the sternum. Long bones have ends that are bulky. Short bones are usually spongy with a thin layer of compact bone. Again, with the flat bones, they're actually not round, but they're mostly curved and found in places around delicate body organs that need to be protected. So, for example, you have the sternum that protects the heart area, and we have the parietal bone, which protects the brain. Irregular bones, we have the vertebrae, the pelvis, or the hip bone. They don't have a certain type of characteristic. That's why they don't belong to long, short, or flat bones. So let's move on to types of bone cells. We have osteocytes, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts. Basically, these types of blood cells are uh, they they're like part of a process. Okay? Osteoclasts, they remove old bone. So basically, they're there to recycle the materials that make up your bone. Okay? Now, osteoblasts, what we call bone-forming cells, they build new bone, which become lining cells first. They become lining cells first before they mature and become osteocytes. Yeah. So these three bone cells actually represent the process of forming bones and reforming them. We call it remodeling. So when bones remodel, old brittle bone tissue is removed and reabsorbed and replaced by new tissue. Remodeling also occurs in reshaping bones after a fracture or repairing microcracks. So for example, there's an injury or you're actually training or exercising and then you get microcracks. It is this process that repairs the bone and makes new bone. Changes in the human skeleton basically from embryo, which when we start, the bones start as hyaline cartilage. And then as we develop, the cartilage is replaced by bone. There are some parts of the body, although, that are retained as cartilage. So for example, we have the bridge of the nose and parts of the ribs and joints. So now let's move on to the divisions of the skeleton. Basically, we have two, the appendicular skeleton and the eggshell skeleton. We have repetitive slides about this. So let's see. Okay. First, the eggshell skeleton is comprised of the head, the neck, and trunk and spine. Okay. And it is the set of skeletons that are found in the longitudinal or the axis from top to bottom. Okay. Again, that's the head, neck, trunk, and spine. We have the appendicular skeleton or appendages, basically. That's the clue. Appendicular skeleton made up of arms and legs as well as where they are attached. Where are they attached? We call it the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdles. So later on, we're going to discuss the surface of bones, the features, because they're relevant to the origin and insertion of muscles. That will be discussed in the muscular system topic later on. Here we have another diagram on the left side, we have the eggshell skeleton, head, neck, thoracic area, and the spine, up to and including this area, the sacrum and the coccyx. On the right side, we have the appendicular skeleton, marked in blue. We have the arms and legs and the pectoral girdle where the arms are attached and the pelvic girdle where the legs are attached. So this is another diagram which has more parts in it, more parts identified. On the left-hand side, we have the eggshell skeleton composed of the skull and ayan, masyadong maliit yung diagram. Thoracic cage and vertebral column. Ayan. Here, you can see the subparts of the lower area of the vertebrae, the sacrum, and the coccyx. Let's check these in detail. Yeah. The eggshell skeleton, skull, vertebra, and rib cage. Hmm. Yeah, we have a bigger diagram. All right. We have here the skull bones, which we will not go much into detail because we're trying to focus on movement, and we're just discussing the skeletal system and how it is related to movement or exercise. So we have a lot of the subparts of the skull. If you want to learn it, it's here. We can see, okay, so we can see here, it was mentioned a while ago, parietal, that portion, right? It's a example of a flat bone. But part of the skull, it's a bit curving. We have the vertebral column at the center and the thoracic or rib cage up to and including the sternum, this one in front, the flat bone in front, where the ribs converge. Let's mention this part of the vertebrae, the sacrum. The sacrum is the second to the last part. Actually, from the anterior view, we can see the coccyx, but from here, no. But we have a term that's called articulation. Later, let's discuss that. Basically, articulation is where the bones meet. Okay? Here, the sacrum from the vertebrae is connected to the hip area or the hip bone. Okay. The hip bone is part of the appendicular skeleton, while the sacrum is part of the axial skeleton. Ayan na. So let's move into the appendicular skeleton. Basically, the clue here is appendage or arms and legs. And we include the anchor or where they are connected. Where they are connected or the anchor, the two girdles, we have the pectoral girdle, one on top, which is composed of the clavicle and scapula. Clavicle is here, that bone just below your neck to the side. And the pelvic girdle or your hips. Actually, your hip, it seems to be just one bone, but it is several portions fused together. You have the ilium, ischium, and pubis. Okay. And this is where the legs are attached. So, uh, we have joints, and where the joints meet, we call these articulation. Where the joints meet, connect, and are formed. So this is another diagram of the appendicular skeleton, identifying the shoulder girdle, which is composed of the clavicle, the one in front, and the scapula, the one, the shoulder blade at the back. The arm bones are identified here further, radius, ulna, and humerus, plus the carpals and metacarpals and phalanges. Basically, carpals, wrist area, metacarpals are the back of the hand or the hand, and the phalanges are your fingers. Now we go to the anterior portion, the hip bone or pelvic girdle, including the legs. The legs, we have the femur, the biggest bone, longest bone, okay. Patella or the kneecap. We have the tibia and fibula. And if we have the carpals on the arm, we have the tarsals on the leg and metatarsals. The fingers of the feet are also called phalanges. Let's move more into articulations. There are three types. Okay? of articulations, or again, where the where the bones meet. First, we have the fibrous articulation. These are basically immovable, connected bones, but there is no movement. For example, the skull and the pelvis. We mentioned before that the pelvis or the hip is actually not just one bone. It's composed of three parts. Next, we have the cartilaginous articulation. They are slightly movable and attached by cartilage. For example, you have the spine and ribs. So your spine, you can move along, you can move your spine, but not too much, right? But since the spine is composed of a lot of bones together, a little movement from one joint to another combined, it can make you do your, for example, lateral flexion, and then you can turn a little bit. Yeah. Then we have the synovial or freely movable. So these are your joints that cause a lot of movement. For example, your fingers, arms and legs, shoulders. The synovial joints or articulations, they have cavities between them, and we'll discuss them later, the parts of the synovial joint. So this slide is actually a bit misleading. It is labeled immovable joint, but it only pertains to this. That portion, the set of bones in the skull, they have parts that are immovable and are joined together but by what we call sutures. Okay? So I magnified this portion, sutures. Okay? And they bind immovable articulations. Along the spine, we have, I magnified this as well from the previous slide, the intervertebral discs. So we have an injury sometimes when these discs pop or are pulled out a little and then the bones sandwich them. It is very painful. Now we have this assembly. We call it's the it's the it's a type of synovial joint, the interphalangeal joint, okay, between your fingers. So we have a cavity filled with the cavity is called synovial cavity, and then we have the fluid that lubricates the joint. We call it the synovial fluid. Now, this fluid and cavity is encapsulated by a synovial membrane attached to the fibrous membrane. So this fibrous membrane and synovial membrane, they make up the articular capsule. Now, what we see here is the articular cartilage. It lines the bone. It lines the bone. Yeah. It lines both bones, the ends of both bones. So that is the anatomy of a synovial joint. So next, I magnify this from the previous slide as well. We have the pubic symphysis. It is a joint sandwich between your left and right parts of the hip. Left and right pelvic bones. Basically, it is where your top part is connected to your bottom part. Okay? It absorbs the weight from your upper body before it travels to your lower body. If we're going to discuss about kinetic chain and center of balance and center of gravity, we're talking about this area. Uh, in childbirth also, it helps separate your pelvic bones for the females. No? Okay, so more about the synovial joint. We discussed this from the previous slide. Yes, we have the parts, the synovial, the let's move back here. The articular capsule, synovial membrane, and fibrous membrane, and the cavity and the synovial fluid. And then the cartilage covering each of the ends of the bones. Okay, so as mentioned before, the synovial joints are the ones that are freely movable. We have subclassifications of these freely movable joints. First, here, we have the plane joint. It is a type of structure in which the articular surfaces or the ends of the bone, where the ends of the bone meet, are flat or nearly flat, enabling the bones to slide over each other. So they're flat, then they slide over each other. We have here the hinge joint. Okay. So what is the example? This is the humerus. So where's the humerus? It's the upper arm. Okay. So basically, think of a hinge or a door. It is it allows movement in one plane. Okay? So one plane only, like a door. Okay? Third, here we have the pivot joint. And the example here is the radius and ulna portion. The ulna is actually a hinge. Radius, and from the term radius, it has a radial movement. It just rotates. And that is the only movement. It's a single axis. It's just rotating. So when you turn your forearm, it is because of the radius. And then when you bend your arm, flex and extend, it is because of the ulna. Those two bones allow those two types of movement. Okay, so next, the fourth one, we have the condyloid joint. And the example here is the joint between the metacarpal part of your hand and the phalanx, the finger. Okay. And so a condyloid joint is rounded or oval. We call a protuberance, the end. Rounded or oval protuberance of a bone received into an elliptical cavity. So basically, oval and then yeah, elliptical cavity. This allows movement in two planes. So for example, we have flexion and extension, adduction and abduction. Look at this. Look at this move, flexion and extension, and then adduction and abduction. So we have one plane and two planes. Okay? Yeah. Next, the saddle joint. The saddle joint, here the example is the carpal and metacarpal. So a while ago, the example is metacarpal and phalanx from your hand to your finger. This time, it's from carpal to metacarpal. Okay? So it's your wrist and your hand. The saddle joint is where the opposing surfaces are reciprocally concave and convex. So what is concave and convex? I added another slide to make it clearer. Here. Yeah, concave and convex. Basically, as the name implies, it looks like a saddle. Okay. Yan. Ay, saan na tayo? Saan tayo? Sorry. Yan, okay. So we have the ball and socket joint. Ball and socket joints allow rotary motion. So medyo paikot all directions. Of course, with certain limits. And the example here is your shoulder joint. Ball and socket joint. Uh, Now we have this slide from our template lesson, but I'm going to magnify it. It's a bit small. No? The writing is a bit small. So let's see. We have more examples of the synovial joints, and we are looking at a uniplanar example. Moving along one plane only, we have the elbow joint, okay? The humerus, and then we have the radius and ulna here, and elbow joint. You're moving along, okay? You're moving along one plane only. So what did I mention a while ago about the radius and ulna? The radius has that pivot joint, but when you're actually pivoting, you're turning your arm, pronating and supinating, but you're not moving your forearm along that plane. So when you're moving your forearm, it is moving along only along the one plane. It's uniplanar. The next example, we have two planes, biplanar or biaxial. So by axis, we have three axes. No? So looking at this example, it is the portion between your metacarpal here on the hand area and your phalanx or the finger. So we have on the left the anterior posterior axis. So basically, anterior back, posterior front. So the axis that runs through from the front through to the back. And along this axis, you turn. It's like a peg. No? The axis is like a peg. And then you turn from that peg. Yeah. The anterior posterior axis is called the front. The axis that strikes through the frontal plane. Yung tumutusok sa frontal plane. Now, here on the right side, we have the mediolateral axis or the axis that strikes through from side to side. And because of that axis, you're moving on the sagittal plane. Okay. Yeah. So this is an example of a biplanar joint. And we have the shoulder joint, a ball and socket joint, which is multiplanar. So we have here the three planes where the shoulder joint moves along. The antero, posterior, nakabulol, axis. And andito kasi, no? So basically, the shoulder joint moves in three ways because of its anatomy as a ball and socket joint. Of course, you have limitations. So for example, you lift your arm to the side, it locks a bit, and because of its anatomy, ball and socket, anterior facing, if you turn your palm up, it is looser to lift your arm than if your palm is facing downwards. So yeah. Again, you can move your ball and socket joint freely, but there are certain limitations as just explained. So these are the three planes. We have the second one, mediolateral, and the third is longitudinal or from top to bottom. Think of these axes as spits. No? For example, barbecue sticks. And where it is pierced, it is where you move along. So for example, this is your barbecue stick, you move along this. If this is your barbecue stick, you move along this. It's like a peg. Yeah. This is the last slide. We have a table of it summarizes types of joints and the number of rotations and axes. Number of axes of rotation, sorry. Okay, so, and also the types of movement, flexion, extension, and etc. Study these in detail. Okay. Let's take an example. If we look at these two examples, the fibrous and the cartilaginous articulations, again, articulations where the bones meet, we can see that there are no axes and movement is slight. So how is that? So for example, the bridge of the nose. You can't really move your nose. But if you push, it's a bit flexible, but there's no real movement. Okay? It's just slightly move. It's slightly flexible just because slightly moving just because it's flexible, but it's not like the synovial joints wherein you have movements. They are freely movable with your skeletal muscles. So with that, that is the intro to our skeletal system. Here's the reference, and thank you.